has been done for corporations, and indeed you've been in a lot of high schools and colleges. I'm far more familiar with your work in recent years working with nonprofits, and indeed you're in the middle of publishing a book. Why don't you tell us about the storytelling book for nonprofits?
Yeah, the book is called Compelling Stories, Compelling Causes, and it's a way to teach nonprofits. They're sitting on gold mines, and they say, why can't we get more funding? Why doesn't the press call me? And so it's teaching them how to look at these everyday events and let them open people's wallets, let them get the reporter interested. And everybody can learn that skill. It takes a little time because we've learned this big abstract, talk about the big issue kind of thinking, and it takes a little while to drop back into our hearts and know how to talk the way we did when we were kids. But it can be done, and it's so powerful when people do.
Well, I think part of the power of your storytelling is, in fact, getting people to find their own voice and to use what might be everyday experiences to really make the case.
People start to get that their lives are interesting and important. Sometimes people will say to me, is your life just more interesting or just know how to tell the story? And it's definitely the latter. Everybody's life is interesting. I love interviewing other people and helping them tell their story. I'm doing a whole set at Jonesboro at the National Festival just on refugee stories that I've collected from people on the North Shore. And it's amazing. And people, the smile on their face, and it's like, oh my God, you got me. And that everybody else is listening and clapping, it's like, holy shoot. And people will say to me, I didn't know that anybody cared. Or last night I just got an email because I had told this one man's story, and he said, when it comes to diversity, I always feel bloodied and bruised. He said, I'm a white Protestant male, and suddenly you showed that I have a place. I have something to do to make the world better. And we need those stories of what's working, not just what's not working.
You know, all three of us on the stage here right now doing the Life from the Heartland show do some writing. And I know I have flashes every day of things I hope to remember for future things I write. And I'm wondering, given connecting this to the social justice, we have a situation in Missouri that has captured the attention of not only people here in the United States but around the world. If you were making notes on those events, what kind of things would you want to incorporate for a future story, maybe when you're a few years older and you're talking about back in those days?
There is something good about having a little distance on some of these stories. I would find a family story, and I would look for something where, for instance, there were differing opinions in that family. So it wouldn't feel like propaganda. I've got one agenda here. It would be showing the real struggle of people who want to be safe and want to be open, and yet this is scary, and somehow there's going to be some kind of movement in those couple people, I wouldn't follow more than probably a couple, that something happens that does give us some hope. I just not like, oh, let's all talk about how horrible it is. Now, I don't manufacture hope, but I find there's always some human joy in the middle of the tragedy, something that helps to balance it out. So something that would be, I would love if there's some success stories that Ferguson has put something together that is helpful, like I'm thinking of an Oak Park and some things where people have done preventative, not just reacting to the emergency. But if something gets created out of this, I would love to tell that story. I find it's the best when you can point to something that's working.
I've got one more little curveball like that.
You are the curveball king.
You know, we saw a rapid change in opinion around gay marriage in this country. And one of the reasons that I think that has happened is that almost every family has somebody who's gay or LGBT in their family or knows somebody. But not everybody in America, particularly white America, knows black people. And I wonder how that gets told, how the kind of lagging behind of social justice for the African American community. How could you share that we made a great advance on the gay marriage, but black people are still exploited and oppressed in many ways?
Well, for my individual artistry, my ministry, I feel like it's my ministry, I take people with me because I do know people of color, and I go to their events and I sit Jackie Robinson's with everybody to watch the Little League game.
This afternoon.
Right, and I tell them those stories. So my one story about the garbage story, I talk about riding the L with my neighbors, and they're training me to be white racist, pointing down, going, look at all the garbage around their houses, and that's what it'd be like if they moved, and would you want to live with that? And again, they're just been miseducated, and they've been segregated, and there's a whole plan to why we kept people apart from each other. But then
they call it God's amazing. Oh,
Tom, we're going to bring you up in about 3 minutes.
Why don't we bring him up now?
Come on up now.
amazing grace.
You're the big boy. You're the youth.
You are,
You're the youth.
you are. I want the world to know that you are.
Okay, Michael.
Listen to 88.7 WLUW Chicago Sound Alliance broadcasting from the campus of Loyola University. It's 9 o'clock. Time now for Live from the
got any
Heartland with Michael
banter we
James
wanna-
and Tom Clark.
Ready?
Okay, we're doing the countdown. 5, 4. Hey, here we are once again at the very lovely and sometimes today sunny corner of Glenwood and Lunt. We are in the heart of Rogers Park. We are from about 2 blocks from the Fresh Coast, a.k.a. the Central Coast on the western shores. And I am Michael James here with
Tom Clark.
And
Good
we
morning,
are your,
Michael.
Good morning, Tom. We are your host for this morning's edition of the Live from the Heartland show, brought to you every Saturday morning on WLUW 88.7 Chicago's Sound Alliance.
And for those of you missing Katie Hogan, we support her in her voter canvass work, which she's doing somewhere out in the northwest suburbs today, as she's been doing every Saturday for the last few months.
Katie's working hard.
Very hard.
And everybody who is not registered to vote needs to do that. We have an important election coming up here in the state of Illinois on November 4th. And we are paying close attention to many races around the country, but particularly our governor's race. And we will keep you informed about developments in that as time goes on. You can just look at today's headlines to know it's in the news.
Michael, how have your travels been with a certain up-and-coming rock group?
I confess I was chasing around after the band Twin Peaks. You can find all about them at twinpeaksdudes.com. And I had a wonderful time driving almost every day, first to Detroit, Cleveland, D.C., did make it to New York, to Manhattan, did make it to Brooklyn, back to Pittsburgh, and then we were here last Saturday night for the very wonderful Glenwood Avenue Arts Fair, right here along the side of the Heartland Cafe and the Red Line Tap, where Twin Peaks actually headlined and kicked it.
We thought about you in particular last week with the 45th anniversary celebration of Woodstock. You are vicariously reliving your youth.
Yeah, but I didn't go to Woodstock. I was in Rising Up Angry in those days, and I had to stay in Chicago and man the fort. And I did write a poem, but I'm not doing that now. No personal stories today.
All right. So, Tom Rosenfeld, we want to try to incorporate you, the owner of the Heartland Cafe, into our weekly farm report. Red Havens came in last week. Boy, are they good. I mean,
Is it Red Haven where the commies hang out?
I don't know.
No, I don't think so, Michael.
There is a pinkish tinge to the Red Haven peach meat, but it's just, every region I noticed this summer during my travels has a peach that they're proud of. In Colorado and Kansas, I don't think anyone beats the Red Haven out of Michigan.
No. Red Haven is a Michigan peach. It's solidly Midwestern peach, and it's a great one. I consider that the standard. We put some Red Havens in on the farm last year.
So how many years before you see fruit from that?
We should see them next year.
All right.
Maybe not enough to bring to market, but enough to eat at the house.
And when you say the farm, you're talking the Earth First Farm.
Earth First Farms.
Over there in Michigan.
Yes.
So a bit more rain, a bit more heat. How's the crop doing?
Well, I mean, if we're going to do kind of a standard farm report, which is I think what we talked about trying to do, and I'd just give it like a little update on what's going on at Earth First Farms. I mean, we're mid-August. We're a little late. It's been a cool summer. We finally got some heat this week, and the tomatoes started finally coming like they're supposed to come.
Ours are really slow in the backyard.
Ours are coming now. So we picked about 1,000 pounds of tomatoes this week, and we're selling them like crazy. And now the apples are coming. So we picked our first fall apple, Paula Red, and we have a few of them at the market this week, and this is the time. So this is the exciting time of year for us. Also crazy time of year at the farm. So now we're picking tomatoes, watermelons, and apples all at the same time.
Well, if we need a job, maybe we can go out there and help you pick.
I think we could use all the help we could get. I mean, part of farming is labor. And part of labor is there's a lot of politics involved, and labor is really, really tight out in farm country right now.
You've made some wonderful moves in the Heartland General Store. It's got a lot of produce and products that are made from agricultural products. Tell us a little bit about what's going on and who's bringing stuff into the store.
Well, I mean, for sure we're featuring Earth First Farms stuff.
But there's another
we got apples and tomatoes in there. We also feature Montalbano Farms. They're a great farm out in western Illinois. He's a great farmer. I've known him for years, and he's got some really nice stuff in there as well.
How about those red and black beans? Where are they from?
That's from Breslin Farms out of Ottawa. That's Molly Breslin.
Okay, we got a lot of farms represented in that store. Y'all check it out. It's
but you also have dairy, and you have tofu now.
We have dairy and tofu. We've got Kilgis Dairy in there. We've also got Fat Blossom Farms in there. Just want to throw a shout out to them. They're another Rogers Park connection to farming. Yeah, we have a lot of good stuff in there.
Okay, we're going to keep you updated every week of what's going on in the world of agriculture and in the market. Tom Rosenfeld from the Heartland Cafe, thanks for coming on today. And thank you for all your support.
All right, thank you. Got to go pick some apples.
Appreciate it. Take care.
All right. Our guests today are going to include Susan O'Halloran, and she's coming up now. Going to do a little bit of storytelling and how stories are related to issues of social justice. A little bit later, we're going to have a couple of really hot musicians. We're going to have Steve Hauser from the Bitterroot Band and the incomparable, the one and only Corky Siegel, right here from
Corky.
Rogers Park. So you stay tuned here on the left end of your dial, 88.7 Chicago Sound Alliance. Right, here we go. Good morning to you, Susan O'Halloran.
Hello, Michael. Hello, Thomas.
Good morning, Susan.
I haven't seen you since the gym.
That's true. We run into each other at the Y often.
That's good. I recommend it highly. Everybody should go to the Y. It's a great little institution up there in Evanston, and of course all around the world. Well, you two go way back. You guys know each other a lot longer than I've known either of you, I believe.
About 15 years old.
Yeah, we met
Maybe 16.
Since about
You
15.
were all in the Catholic youth activities. What was it called?
YCS, Young Christian Students. It was a social justice club for teenagers, and Tom was from River Forest. I was from the southwest side, but kids from all over the city met together, and it was one of the first interracial places kids could hang out in Chicago.
I can't do the math this early in the morning, but 1966, this month, St. Joe's and Rensselaer is probably where we first met.
Yeah, everybody came from the whole region, our city, but some other states as well, for a whole week of panel discussions, talks, lots of dancing and kissing and things like that too. But it was a wonderful teen conference in St. Joe's.
And we talked about issues, and there were a few going on in those days.
I remember, not to tell too many personal stories, but I did whip in from California and was living in Uptown, and we were starting rent strikes and marches on the police station. It was a heavy time.
Well, the amazing thing for us is that the adults who mentored us were working with Dr. King. Some of them were going down south. They would get trained, and then they'd come up and they'd train us kids. There was, of course, in Dr. King's movement, too, teenagers were involved. But we were treated like the adults. We were taught group discussion techniques and how to get up and speak in front of people, and we organized press conferences. So it was a pretty...
How to run a mimeograph machine and
right.
use address labels.
Was the mimeograph machine the ditto machine, the purple ink?
No,
Yeah.
this was like a Stetner
But
mimeograph.
Going way back,
You could
we used
only
to
get
have those purple ones. I
you
remember
could only
in
get
fourth
100
grade.
copies out of a purple one, and mimeograph you can get.
All right, I get
1,000.
it. Well, I never was grasping the words for the technology, but I certainly could pour the ink in and take the paper out of the tray as a fourth grader at Bedford Elementary School.
So, Susan, you've made a career now out of storytelling. 25, 30 years ago, that was doing corporate diversity training. That phrase I think is still used today, but I think it has a little different, particularly given the headlines, a little different connotation. When you talk about doing storytelling for social justice, what are you really talking about?
It's a way of talking about the issues and yet getting past that debate team mentality. Most of us were taught to beef up our case and be right, and then the other person's got to beef up their case, and there's no movement. But when you tell stories, it reaches the heart. We use visceral, sensory language. It puts people in, literally, if you hooked up their brain, it would be firing in a different place than when people are arguing. And they go into their imagination. They have feelings. I can take people to Guatemala. I can take them to the border where the kids are being held right now that have come up from Mexico and Central America. I can take them these places, and suddenly they're seeing it from a human perspective. So I walk into places that you would think are so against anything I believe, and we're weeping together because we're talking about family and real people. It's just like the LGBT issues have started to change because people have talked about my sister, my friend, my colleague. That's often where change happens. So it's really kind of a subversive and wonderful tool to have. And Tom knows because he was executive director of Community Media Workshop for 100 years, and we were working with nonprofits because it was the best way to raise money. It was the best way to get the press to pay attention, is to tell stories.
Let me get some promotional stuff out of the way. You had a web story session last night. I hope
Yeah.
that went well, but you have something else going on tomorrow.
Sunday night at the Celtic Knot in Evanston, Illinois. Wonderful little space. They have a back room called the Snug, and they're very great supporters of storytelling. So I will be telling stories of hope. I'm getting ready for a couple big festivals, Sterling Festival down in southern Illinois next week, and then the Jonesboro National Storytelling Festival. 10,000 people come over a weekend to hear stories. People will sit in chairs for 8 hours a day listening to stories. It's an amazing thing. You have thousands of people in front of you. But I have like 6 hours of stories to tell. So I've been breaking it up, and this Celtic Knot is one of the places you can go and practice stories. I won't just practice on you. You'll hear good stories. But at 8 o'clock, come for dinner ahead of time. It's a great Irish pub. And then it's just a love offering past the hat. So I appreciate people letting me get a chance to practice.
I like that word, love offering.
Yeah.
Sue Halloran, we've had you on the show before. We also had Mike McCarty on the show. We've had other storytellers. Storytelling has been going on for a long time, long time, throughout history, before TV, before radio, et cetera, et cetera. But I wondered if you could give us a little analysis, a little information on the kind of development of the current modern storytelling movement, because it wasn't every day that you had these festivals or events where people were actually crafting their narrative and sharing their stories.
Right. The storytelling movement that I've been part of is about a 40-year process, actually. And now there's not a state that doesn't have a major festival where thousands of people come, sit under tents, the sound system's really good, and you talk to 500-600 people. In the last 5 to 10 years, there's been a new movement with younger folks, mostly leading it, of telling stories in pubs. And this has been mostly personal narratives. When we were doing our beginning of our whole festival, it was more folk tales, and then people started to do personal. But the young people tell 5 minutes. It kind of came off of the stories, the poetry slams. 5-minute stories a lot, short stories. They're usually funny. So we have the Moth and all these radio hour things that are happening now. There are now 40 different venues in Chicago where at any time, any day of the week, people can get up and tell stories. Some they get chosen, some you just put your name in a hat and get chosen. And it's interesting. We love it. We love the energy. The next generation's always going to invent its next form. At the same time, the kind of stories I'll be telling Sunday night at Celtic Knot, I can't tell in most of these places. I'm going to the pubs, I'm meeting the young people, loving their energy, but in 5 minutes it's hard for me to talk about genocide. It just is. But so a lot of my stories turn out to be 15 minutes, 30 minutes, because they're issue-oriented. So they're doing wonderful things, and there's a limitation to it, just as there was limitations to what we did. We weren't drinking beer when we were having our festivals. They figured something out.
How
Loosens them up.
do you talk about issues, particularly the racial and ethnic justice issues that infuse your stories? How do you talk about those issues without being preachy?
The way you do it is by just talking person to person. And here's what I do. I use myself as a character in the stories, and I'm often knowing less in the stories than I do now, in the sense that I tell you how I came to learn something, and that's not so threatening. I was raised in an all-white neighborhood. I heard the N-word every day of my life, probably 30, 50 times. How did I go from that to being a person who cares and works for social justice? That's a journey. So as I take people on that journey, they're just watching a kid grow up. They're watching a kid be surprised and confused and learn things. And then I carry that into my adulthood stories as well. So it's not threatening that way. People are going on this journey with you, and they're learning as you learn, as opposed to, I'm here, I know it all, you should be here, come and know what I know. Well, everybody's going to be, even if you agree with somebody, you're resistant if somebody tells you what you should know.
How do current events affect the stories you've already prepared? Whether it's street violence in our neighborhoods this summer, Ferguson, I mean, these are your issues, unfortunately, are in the news all the time. How do you incorporate that into the stories you've already prepared?
You know, a lot of times I don't, again, deal with it directly, because then we'll get in a debate team, because everybody's got their opinions. And I don't know about you, but as I get older, I find out my opinions have very little to do with my quality of life. So I try to stay away from those opinions. And I tell this story of going to Guatemala and meeting the children down there and the kind of lives. And in one village I went to visit, 22 of the fathers had been killed the Christmas before. And you know, you don't have to draw huge lines for people of what's the life like for those children who've all, their parents were killed. Well, maybe some of them are sitting on the border right now. Maybe that's the reason some of these kids are coming up trying to find a better life, or parents are sending them up. So people make the inferences themselves. If I have a Q&A afterwards, then like last night on the live web show, we had people from Australia, Germany. It's so sitting in my living room telling stories to people around the world. It's amazing, the technology. And of course, those issues came up. But they came up now with a heartfelt experience that they experienced live children, because that's what our imagination can't tell the difference between what's live and what's imaginative. They fell in love with Paco and Leslie, and now we're talking about the children. And I find the discussion is much more fruitful when we got real people we're talking about.
We don't have 15 minutes. In fact, it's probably more like the 5. But were you prepared to share a brief tale with us this morning?
I'll share just a little bit of going to
I know it's a little unfair to ask you to do a quickie, but...
No, this will be a section of the story I'll be telling about taking my sons when they were 23 and 21 down to Guatemala. I was going to inspire them with these people working for social justice, and of course I'm the one that totally loses my idealism and goes down into total depression and have to climb back out. But here's just like a little excerpt that teaches something without getting too preachy.
This is Susan O'Halloran, a professional storyteller and old friend and colleague. You're listening to Live from the Heartland on WLUW 88.7. I'm with Michael James, and Sue, take it away.
This is a story about taking my sons to Guatemala in 1993, and we were headed up to the village where we were staying, and the van breaks down and we have to get out. And Bob, who is the president of Christian Foundation for Children and Aging, is standing along the roadside, and I go next to him. And I looked at Bob, and he's staring across out into the distance, and he points and he says, "Look at those guys farming." And I look, and I see these men hanging by ropes off of a cliff, looking like toy action figures dangling from strings. "Farming?" I asked, "with ropes?" And he said, "You know how the Spaniards came in here in the 1500s, kind of took over the place, but there's something down here in Guatemala they call the Second Conquest. American, German, other companies were given these huge tracts of land to grow fruit and sugar and coffee, raise cattle. So the people were pushed out. There was only one place to go, to these rocky mountaintops. I mean, they still work for the plantation owners. It's the only game in town, but they're paid a pittance for working 6 days a week." And then Bob said to me, "But they can't have enough to feed their families, so they search in between their rocky homes for a little piece of dirt they could push in a seed for a tomato plant or a squash vine." And I looked closer, and yeah, I could see now that these men had like trowels or something in their hand. They were working the dirt in the cliff to see if they could plant something. If I'd seen them at all, I would have thought they were mining or something. And he said, and then if they can grow something, they can't cook it. There's not enough wood for their stoves. And I would see what he mean, because we'd go on these day trips and we'd be going through gorgeous green mountains, waterfalls, National Geographic kind of views. And we'd go over the other side of the mountain, boom, barren, nothing. Deforested, not because of any weather patterns, but because of all the teak and mahogany sent up to the United States. Down here, Bob said, firewood's something to kill for. People spent 5-6 hours a day searching for wood. And he pointed to another ridge in the distance where the sun was setting. And I saw this line of people, silhouettes, people bent over with bundles of branches on their back, looking like ants carrying home large crumbs of food. So here's an example. So you just got a big lesson.
Yep.
But I'm standing there, stalled car, you're involved in the journey, and I'm learning. You learn as I learn. Now, did I already know about the deforestation in Central America? Yeah. But I give it to Bob to teach me.
And what did your sons pull out of this trip that you know of?
To tell you the truth, the biggest thing they pulled out of was how fun it was to make firecrackers, taking newspaper and putting gunpowder and wrapping it and setting it on fire. They were these testosterone-laden 20-year-olds, and they had more fun because it's constant fireworks over the holidays down in Guatemala, and they just were playing with the kids of Adzapa. But on top of that, they also learned, I remember going into the teacher training center that CFCA helped to support, and we were going in classrooms, there were pictures of young men and young women, and my kids are like, "Oh, the graduating classes," and the director says, "Yeah, but those are the pictures of graduating teachers who have already been killed, teaching Mayan Indians to be self-sufficient, whether that's to read or to repair a car. It's just too threatening to the status quo." And so my kids are like, whoa. So they learned a lot. It was an incredible experience for them.
Well, a lot of your storytelling work
Across the color line, and I'm meeting black people who are demonstrating at City Hall, dumping their garbage, protesting that they're not having the same city services.
Yeah.
Whoa, okay, now there's a whole reason why they have garbage and we don't. And the biggest thing I hear after my show is people coming up to me and saying, "I didn't know that.
Right.
I didn't know that. Oh my God, I was afraid to ask because it would sound racist even to say, why are their homes in worse condition? But you explained how the white landlords aren't taking care of it, and you introduced me to this man who's trapped in his apartment for 2 weeks because he can't get down the stairs because the landlord, and this woman who's was at the emergency room that day because the ceiling fell in and her 6-year-old niece got hurt, and suddenly they're literally in somebody else's shoes. We have the time machine. We have the transport people into other people's shoes machine when we tell stories.
I think one of the strongest signs of how powerful your tool is in this time of shouting matches. You referred to the debate society. We don't have much dialogue going on, and somehow, because I've seen it happen in the rooms you work in, when you get people telling their own stories, those other stereotypic lines kind of begin to dissolve. It doesn't solve all the problems, but I think if through storytelling we can reduce the shouting and maybe hear each other more.
Yeah, when people will say, well, we should talk about race, so we're just going to get people together and talk about it. I'm like, no! Because what will happen? Everybody just hardens their position and walks out feeling horrible, and white people feel guiltier, and people of color feel angrier. And so it's stories, and it's also, frankly, really getting some good guidelines of what it means to talk. What's the difference between a discussion and an argument? And
Okay, one more time. You are performing tomorrow night at the Celtic Knot.
yes, the Celtic Knot on Church Street, right across from the Evanston Library at 8 o'clock. It's a free, though I'll take any little money you want to give me, event. And I will tell you for about an hour and 10 minutes 3 pretty amazing stories.
And if people want to find out more about the storytelling book for nonprofits or the other things that Susan O'Halloran Productions does,
I would say SusanO'Halloran.com will be the best place to go, and there's a form there if people want to email me directly.
Let's have a big round of applause for Susan O'Halloran. You are listening to the Live from the Heartland show, brought to you every week on WLUW 88.7 Chicago Sound Alliance. You can look at earlier shows if you go to youtube.com/Heartland Media. And if you are traveling, you can listen to this show anywhere in the world on WLUW.org. Okay, let's take a...